The email arrived at 7:43 in the morning on a Wednesday, and I almost didn't open it. I was standing in the lobby of a Marriott in Denver, travel mug in one hand, leather portfolio tucked under my arm, 12 minutes from a client site visit with a regional hospital group that had hired me to audit their vendor payment systems. My phone buzzed. The sender was my mother, Renata. The subject line read, "Don't come back early. Enjoy starting over." I opened it because I thought it was about the heating bill or the plumber or one of the 100 small pointed complaints she had been routing through my inbox since I'd made the miscalculation of inviting her to live with me. It was 3 paragraphs short, almost breezy. She and my sister Danny had made a decision. They had cleared the house, furniture, electronics, jewelry, the cedar chest my grandmother had brought from Guadalajara, loaded everything into a moving truck, and driven south to Scottsdale, where Danny had found a short-term rental. The last line read, "Your savings are already taken care of. You were always better at being alone anyway." I read it twice, then a third time. Then I smiled. Not from relief, not from shock. The specific, quiet smile that comes when something you spent months preparing for finally arrives, and you realize the preparation was enough. My name is Margot Delgado. I'm 36 years old. For the past 11 years, I have worked in healthcare compliance consulting, which means hospital networks and insurance intermediaries pay me to find where money disappears before the disappearance becomes a scandal. I am, by professional formation, a person who does not leave important things unguarded. I read contracts the way other people read menus. I keep records the way other people keep grudges, carefully organized by date and never thrown away. Renata and Danny had not accounted for that. Let me go back. My father, Ernesto, died 20 months before the events I'm describing. Pulmonary embolism, fast. The kind of death that doesn't give you time to prepare the people around you for what losing you will mean. He left behind a life insurance policy, a 16-year-old Subaru, and a family architecture. Danny is 5 years older than me. She was the one my mother worried about, organized around, returned to whenever things went sideways. Danny had dropped out of a graduate program, accumulated debt, cycled through cities and roommates and jobs with a kind of restless charm that my mother called finding herself, and that I had watched from the outside for years without being able to name what bothered me about it. I had put myself through a university program on academic scholarship, worked weekends, graduated without debt, and built a career that required precision and discipline. My mother's response to those years was usually a brief nod, as if I had simply done what anyone would do after Ernesto died. Renata said she couldn't manage the house alone. She was 63, in good health, fully capable of independent life. But grief makes people say things, and I was not immune to my own grief either. So I invited her to stay with me in the house I had bought in Sacramento at 31. Then Danny just needed a few months to regroup. Those months became 3 years. I paid the mortgage, the utilities, the groceries, the property taxes, the homeowner's insurance. I drove Renata to her appointments. I handled the estate paperwork when my father died. All of it, while running a consulting practice that required me to travel 4 or 5 days most months. In return, I was treated the way useful things are treated, relied upon, and resented. The small signs came in sequence the way they always do. Danny started asking questions about my banking setup about 9 months before Denver Casual folded into ordinary conversation. Do you use a credit union or a regular bank? Is your savings account the same one you use for the utilities? I told myself she was thinking about consolidating her own accounts. I told myself it was nothing. Then I noticed mail being opened and resealed. Not obviously, just slightly misaligned at the fold. The corner lifted and pressed back down in a way that was almost invisible. One piece, then two. I told myself it was the humidity. Then, Renata started standing in doorways. When I paid household bills, not asking anything, just present, eyes moving toward the laptop screen without quite landing there. The moment of cold clarity came on a Thursday evening in April. I came home from a 2-day client trip to find Danny at the small desk in my home office, sitting with her back to the door, working something out on paper with a printed bank statement I had left in the recycling bin. She closed the paper quickly when she heard me, said she was just using the desk. Her expression was not embarrassed. It was interrupted. I didn't say anything. I went to my bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed with my hands very still in my lap. I didn't feel panic. I felt the particular cold clarity that arrives when something you've been quietly categorizing as probably nothing reveals itself as something. That night, I called my attorney, Philip Weston. Philip is 51, former banking litigator, now runs a private practice in Sacramento. Focused on asset protection and civil disputes, he has a deliberate, unrattled quality that makes chaotic situations feel containable. When I told him what I'd seen, he was quiet for a moment. Then, "How much of your full financial picture do they have?" I said. "Probably too much," he said. "Then we start today, not after." That was the beginning of 5 months of careful, quiet work. Philip brought in a forensic accountant named Clara Abanes, 15 years of experience in asset tracing and fraud documentation. She reviewed my records within a week and produced a 12-page report documenting unauthorized activity going back 8 months, small amounts, irregular intervals, from an account Renata had limited access to for household expenses. The restructuring was methodical. The bulk of my savings was moved out of the account Renata believed was my primary repository. What remained in the visible account was a structured holding balance, legitimate funds, but arranged so that any unauthorized transfer would create a documented paper trail across state lines, triggering federal statutes on wire fraud. I photographed every item of value in the house: serial numbers, purchase receipts, insurance valuations. Several pieces I suspected Danny had been appraising were quietly replaced with insured replicas after Clara confirmed the appraisal. Research in the browsing history of the household tablet, which Danny used regularly and assumed was not monitored. It was monitored. I updated the security system to a private cloud backup they had no knowledge of. Full audio and video coverage of the main entry, the living room, and the front exterior. I removed Renata from the household expense account and replaced her access with a limited use card. $200 ceiling with real-time alerts to my phone. Then I waited. The consulting trip to Denver was scheduled in early November. I told Renata and Danny 10 days in advance and watched their reactions carefully. Danny nodded quickly and left the room. Renata asked what day I was leaving. Both responses were slightly off in a way I couldn't have explained to anyone who hadn't been watching as long as I had. I left on a Monday. By Wednesday morning, while I was reviewing vendor contract discrepancies on the 4th floor of a hospital administrative building, the email arrived. I stood in the lobby and breathed for 40 seconds. My hands were cold. Something at the back of my throat wanted to become a sound I was not going to make in a hotel lobby. Then, I forwarded the email to Philip. Then I called my bank's fraud contact, a senior specialist named Adrian Cole, a relationship Philip had established specifically for this possibility 6 months earlier. Then I opened my laptop and checked the security archive. The moving truck had arrived at 8:40 that morning. The footage was 14 minutes long. I watched my house emptied room by room. The dining table, the framed photographs, the cedar chest, the record player Ernesto and I had rebuilt together when I was 19. Danny's voice came through the audio. Clearly, at one point, she said, "Take everything that has value first. Leave the books." I closed the laptop, stood up, walked into my next meeting. I am a professional. I was not going to let them take that, too. By that evening, Philip had filed emergency notices with Sacramento PD's Property Crimes Division, the bank's fraud unit, and a federal reporting channel. The movement of property across state lines and the attempted transfer of funds from flagged accounts triggered jurisdiction under federal statute. Philip had also contacted the Scottsdale Rentals Management Office, whose confirmation email Renata had mistakenly forwarded to a shared family account. I still had read access, too. The property manager cooperated immediately. He had no interest in the middle of a fraud case. Adrian Cole confirmed within 2 hours that the account Renata had accessed was frozen pending investigation. The transfer Renata believed she had completed had processed into a review queue. The funds were inaccessible. The paper trail attached to every digit. I flew home the next morning. The house was stripped. I unlocked the front door at 11:17 and stood in the entry and let the silence settle. No rug, no console table, no photograph of my father and me at my graduate pinning ceremony, which had hung in that hallway for 4 years. The hooks, where my coat and Renata's coat had hung side by side, were bare. The air smelled like packing tape and the specific absence of everything familiar. I put on latex gloves. Philip had told me to treat the house as a potential evidence scene and photographed every room, every empty bracket, every drawer left crooked. Renata had left a printed note on the kitchen floor. Beside the open safe, she had taken the $800 in emergency cash I had placed there deliberately, along with documents formatted to look like account information. She had not looked under the bottom shelf taped there. Was a small index card in my handwriting that said, "Check the account names again." I photographed it in place, then peeled it off and put it in my bag. Then I poured a glass of water, because it was the one thing they hadn't taken that I needed right then. And I waited. Danny called first, at 6:58. I let it go. Renata called at 7:40. Then 7:43, on the fourth attempt, I answered. She skipped. "Hello?" Renata has not said hello to me in years. I note that as documentation, not grievance, and launch straight in, her voice pitched high, tight. "What did you do? The card isn't working. The transfer is frozen. The rental office is asking about payment." I leaned against the stripped kitchen counter outside the window. A neighbor's sprinkler was running. A completely ordinary Thursday morning, help with what I said, the accounts. "What accounts?" I said, "The ones that belong to me." Danny grabbed the phone. I could hear wind and traffic. "Stop playing games, whatever. You reported, undo it. We're here and it's your fault." "I didn't take anything." I said, "You did." "She said you took my property. You emptied my house. And your mother sent me a written description of exactly what happened with a subject line." "That email was between family," Renata shouted from somewhere behind her. I wrote that line on a notepad immediately after hanging up. Philip laughed for a full 10 seconds when I read it to him. She had sent a written account of felony theft to my professional email address and believed it was a private family communication. What followed was not cinematic. Real legal processes are spreadsheets and scheduled calls and documents filed with exhibit numbers. My neighbor, Greta Sandoval, had seen the moving truck that morning and filmed 42 seconds on her phone. Danny, clearly visible in the doorway. Her voice audible on the clip. A detective named Lorraine Castillo was assigned through Sacramento's Property Crimes Unit, and she reviewed the security footage. Greta's clip, Renata's email, and Clara's financial documentation in a single 3-hour session. When she finished, she looked at me and said, "You did half our work already." "It's what I do for a living," I said. She almost smiled. The civil settlement came 4 months later. Renata's attorney negotiated it to avoid a full trial. Structured repayment of misappropriated funds. Return a replacement value for removed property. A formal acknowledgement filed with the case record that the removal had been unauthorized. Danny's separate restitution agreement included a probationary structure that would escalate to criminal charges if violated. Between the recovery, the insurance claim, and the restitution payments, I got back approximately 89% of what had been taken. Real life leaves dents. I rebuilt the house the way I'd always wanted it, bought a dining table alone on a Saturday morning, repainted the 2 back rooms, turned Danny's old bedroom into an office for my consulting practice, standing desk, second monitor, proper chair, and within 60 days was running 3 new client contracts out of that space. The room that had held 3 years of someone else's chaos and my own unreciprocated patience was now the room where I was building what came next that was my favorite part. I won't pretend otherwise. Renata called once more about 7 weeks after the settlement. She wanted to know if there was a path back to a relationship. I thought about that question for a moment. I thought about 11 years of being the one who paid and worked and showed up and managed and stayed. I thought about the calculator, the resealed mail, the doorway she stood in while I paid bills. I thought about the email and her voice from a Scottsdale hotel lobby saying she had just wanted Danny to have a real life, as though my life were a resource she was entitled to redirect. "I don't know," I said. "Not right now." She hung up first. Here is the only thing I'll say directly to you. I did not set a trap. That framing is how people who've been caught prefer to tell the story. What I did was notice, document, and protect myself from a threat I watched develop in my own home. Over nearly a year, what Renata and Danny called a trap is just reality when you take something that doesn't belong to you. The records kept by the person you took it from. That is not cruelty. That is accounting. People who take from family depend on a single assumption above everything else: that love means you won't enforce what's yours, that you'll be too hurt to be methodical, too guilty to file a report, too afraid of being called cold to protect yourself. I had spent 36 years being taught that lesson. I had finally decided it wasn't one I needed to keep learning. So, here is what I'll leave you with. If someone in your life has been making you feel that protecting yourself is a betrayal of them,